So now that we've gone through this algorithm as a flowchart, Brian, what do we have here?
Pseudocode.
Oh, we have the swap sort operation in pseudocode. Let's kind of walk through one at a time so that we kind of understand how we convert the diagram on the left to the code on the right. As you can see, the function is called sort, and we have labeled the function here, function sort. And over here we have the parameter. So what we say in our pseudocode here is the required parameter is ARR, which represents the array that we're passing.
The unsorted array.
The unsorted array, the input data. So Brian, what happens here?
So now we check the length of the array. So we're calling another function, a predefined function called length.
Yeah, just pretend like we've already written that.
And a lot of times in pseudocode, if you call a function that's not defined, you can just assume that some function like that exists that will return what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So something like length, count, substring, things like that will generally just assume that you don't have to write that yourself. So the length will return the length of the array. And we're going to store that in the variable length. Also, you can see in the starting position of the for loop that we initialize the variable I to 0, just like we've done before. The next part of the flowchart, you can see that I less than length minus 1 is going to be our condition of the for loop. So that goes into the middle between the semicolons. Just as you can see in the middle of the for, I is less than length minus 1. And then at the end of the for loop, there's the I++. And that
which we don't get to yet.
Right.
That increment happens after we've gone through the loop. So you can see the flow of a for loop is I check the condition here. If this condition is true, continue on. That incrementer operation happens after the iteration is done.
Right. We now evaluate the contents. If the contents of array position I, which is 0, is greater than array contents at position I+1, do the following block of code. In the yes or no of the flowchart, the yes path goes inside this block of code. The no path would skip this block of code.
And go to the next iteration.
Right. Because there's no other code left at the end of the for loop.
Which we'll get to. We're going to take this the whole way through.
This, inside of this if condition, is our swap statement.
So our swap statement, like we described before, we're just going to be storing the values and then setting I to 0 or to -1. But the important thing to understand is this little box fits in this little box on the right. So this little box represents our block of code that belongs to the if statement that came before it.
Right.
Now, once this condition has been evaluated and either processed or skipped based on the if condition above, we drop into the incrementer, which happens here, I equals I+1, or it's also expressed in this case as I++. So we've actually gone through one iteration of the for loop where the condition is true. Now, what happens when we come back to this condition and evaluate it and it's false? Well, first off, you can see that we go from the incrementer statement immediately to the condition statement. Now let's go through the scenario where this condition is no longer true. Well, we drop to this return. And you can see on the bottom of our pseudocode, we're returning ARR, which equals the value of the sorted list.
So that's a pretty fast and dirty walkthrough of translating a flow diagram to pseudocode. Mm-hmm. And there's really not that big of a leap.
No, it's not.
So I hope that helps you to bridge the gap between those two.
Yes, and pay attention to this, guys, because when you get good at this, you're going to be amazed at how easy your transition to C is going to be.
You can do a lot of these as exercises. You can make a flow diagram of how to start a car and try to put it into pseudocode. You can anything that you do, you can try for yourself to make up a flow diagram and just try putting it into pseudocode for practice.
Yep. All right, thanks, guys. We'll see you in the next video.